Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And if X-Men is any part of your world, then these are truly exciting times. On top of the ever-evolving landscape of the comics, the franchise overall got a hell of a boost with X-Men 97. It wasn't just the first X-Men cartoon we've gotten in over a decade. In just one 10-episode season, this show reinvigorated the marvelous world of mutants in a way that was nothing short of astonishing. After years of X-Men media being driven by the Fox-produced movies, as well as being disturbingly undermined in the comics in favor of the Inhumans, things are really looking up for the franchise. X-Men 97 didn't just remind us why the X-Men are so endearing, they introduced just how great they can be to a whole new generation. That remarkable first season both set the tone and laid the foundation. The fact the season finale ended with multiple cliffhangers only made the prospect of future seasons even more likely. As of the making of this video, Season 2 is deep into production. Season 3 is all but confirmed. But anything beyond that is uncertain. Given the high praise among fans and critics that this show has garnered, it's very likely that X-Men 97 has plenty more stories to tell. The first season did a hell of a job speedrunning through multiple arcs from the comics, from Inferno to Life Death to Operation Zero Tolerance to E is for Extinction. But there are still decades worth of other comics to draw from. And while we wait for more information and teases on what's to come, I'd like to share my theories and predictions on what we may see in future seasons of X-Men 97. As always, I must note that I have no inside information. This is just me speculating on what the future may hold for this series. Some are similar to what other popular comic book channels have proposed, but I've also included a few that I don't think anyone else has contemplated. And if some do pan out, well, that'll just ensure that this video ages remarkably well. This isn't a theory as much as it is an extension of what actually unfolded in the Season 1 finale. It's now all but inevitable that Apocalypse will factor heavily into the events of Season 2. He was also a big part of multiple seasons in the original 90s show. He essentially functioned as this overpowered, pure evil villain who often required more than just teamwork to defeat. But in terms of actual depth, Apocalypse really didn't have much. Nearly every bit of dialogue had him proclaiming that he was this immortal, unceasing, and ever-present threat. No matter how many times he was defeated, he would always come back somehow. Sure, that made him menacing, but it also obscured the nature of his backstory in the comics. And since the late 90s, that story has definitely evolved. What we saw in that final scene with the X-Men and a young In-Sabanur marked the first step in giving Apocalypse more depth. In 3000 BC, he had yet to become this imposing, ever-present threat. He was just another mutant, and the first mutant at that. And I think encountering him in the past is going to set the stage for a unique take on the iconic Age of Apocalypse storyline. Because we've already seen a version of that story in the original series. In the One Man's Worth episodes, we got a vision of a future in which Magneto leads a team of remaining mutants against Apocalypse's forces. And in other episodes like Time Fugitive, we see that fight continuing to play out even further into the future. These previous arcs makes clear that stopping Apocalypse in the present and the future just isn't possible. So, the X-Men will need to find a way to stop him in the past. Either the X-Men will try to stop him from becoming Apocalypse in the first place, or they'll find a way to set him up for defeat in the future. The post-credit scene in the finale also shows that Apocalypse is indeed in the present. He knows what happened on Genosha, and he teased that he'll be assembling a new team of Horsemen, one of which is almost certain to be Gambit. But I suspect the X-Men in the past will greatly influence Apocalypse's nature in the future. I think Xavier is going to try to stop him from becoming so evil, encouraging him to see himself as more than just a manifestation of Darwinian destruction. But at the same time, I can see Magneto trying to influence young Apocalypse to further his own goals, which are certain to diverge from Xavier's as they so often do. But whatever the influence, it will carry forward into the present. It will affect Apocalypse, his plans, and even who his horsemen end up being. Gambit's death is all but certain, but I can also see Storm as famine, Morph as pestilence, and Wolverine as war. While I doubt this will result in Apocalypse ever becoming a good guy, as he briefly did in the comics, I suspect he'll evolve as a character and as a villain, and that evolution will definitely have an impact on how future seasons of the show unfold. One of the most memorable moments in X-Men 97 to date happened at the end of Episode 9. While trying to convince Magneto to restore Earth's magnetic field, he unleashed a brutal attack on Wolverine in which he ripped the adamantium right out of his body. And this moment was taken straight from the pages of the comics. It remains one of the most pivotal moments in X-Men history, not just for its brutality, but because it helped set the stage for Onslaught. Now, for those who didn't follow the X-Men comics in the 90s, Onslaught was this incredibly powerful being who manifested from the worst parts of Charles Xavier and Magneto's mind. His existence first emerged when Xavier launched a powerful psychic attack on Magneto shortly after what he did to Wolverine. It was an attack that crossed lines he had never crossed to that point, awakening this dark side that, when combined with Magneto's dark side, created one of the biggest threats the Marvel Universe ever faced. While there was a similar clash in the finale of Season 1, there was no hint that Onslaught was starting to manifest. Maybe something did unfold behind the scenes and we won't know for sure until Season 2. But my theory is that Onslaught's story will tie directly into what happens with Apocalypse. With both Magneto and Xavier in the past, and likely having differing opinions on how to deal with Insabanur, I think that will put them on another collision course. And to make things even more volatile, I predict that the celestial technology that Apocalypse originally used on himself will become involved. That technology was briefly referenced in the original show, offering a few minor connections to Apocalypse's origin in the comics. But I think it'll be more fleshed out in X-Men 97, possibly introducing relics like the Death Seed. And this, I believe, could be the real catalyst for Onslaught, the darkest personas of Charles Xavier and Magneto supercharged by celestial technology. With that kind of power, Onslaught would be a threat in the past, present, and future. He might first start off as one of the few beings powerful enough to take down Apocalypse. But why would he stop there? Why wouldn't he go further, attempting to remake the world and the entire timeline to his liking? He actually ended up doing something like this in the comics, and stopping him required the combined efforts of the X-Men, the Avengers, and numerous other heroes. The stage for this is already set. We already saw brief glimpses of the Avengers as well as Spider-Man and Daredevil in Season 1. I think the arrival of Apocalypse will essentially require that the X-Men work with the Avengers to stop him. It would make for a hell of a final battle, and if this show can capture even a fraction of what the comics delivered, it would be epic on a whole new level. This theory plays directly off the previous theory, because if Onslaught emerges at any point in Season 2 or beyond, then the Avengers will enter the picture at some point. Captain America and Iron Man have already shown up as allies to the US government, and they might have their share of non-mutant threats to combat. But Onslaught could really change that dynamic. And I predict that whenever Onslaught does show up, it will get the X-Men and the Avengers on the same page. They'll probably even get a moment on par with Avengers Endgame. I can totally see Cyclops saying, "To me, my X-Men," alongside Captain America while he says, "Avengers assemble." It would be the kind of thing that gets fans of the 90s cartoons and the MCU cheering. However, I also predict that this brief unity will not last. In the comics, there was a great deal of tension over what to do with Xavier and Magneto in wake of Onslaught. Now that tension did not get fleshed out for reasons too complicated to fit into this video, but X-Men 97 has a chance to delve into it even more. I can easily see someone like Iron Man arguing that Magneto has to be imprisoned or permanently depowered. We already saw in Episode 2 of Season 1 that the government does have this technology thanks to Forge. That could cause plenty of consternation between the Avengers and the X-Men, but I think the real catalyst would come if Graydon Creed becomes president. He was briefly referenced as a candidate in the finale, and given his history with the Friends of Humanity, I imagine he would not stop at simply depowering dangerous mutants. But it's the role the Avengers play within the government that will likely become a bigger problem. It might not lead to a full-blown Avengers vs. X-Men story. I think that won't happen until Season 3 at the earliest. But in Season 2, we will see the seeds of this conflict brewing. The Avengers already demonstrated in Season 1 that mutants aren't a priority. Yes, Captain America did express sympathy for mutants after what happened on Genosha, but playing by the government's rules, that just isn't enough. Rogue made that abundantly clear. And if someone like Graydon Creed starts changing the rules, then things between the X-Men and the Avengers are bound to get a lot more volatile. One of the most remarkable aspects of X-Men 97 was just how much restraint it showed in how it handled Wolverine. Because for 20 years, many X-Men fans watched as Fox basically forced Wolverine to be front and center through multiple movies, essentially reducing the X-Men to supporting characters. Now, with all due respect to Hugh Jackman, this really undermined the quality of those movies. But X-Men 97 took a much more balanced approach, keeping Wolverine in more of a supportive role. But I think Season 2 will give him a more active role, and not just because of what Magneto did to him. In the comics, losing his adamantium skeleton didn't just make him more prone to breaking bones, it resulted in him becoming more animal-like in both mind and body. He became so feral that he came dangerously close to losing his humanity altogether. And I predict that Season 2 will have him wrestling with that as well. But in terms of where and how he goes about this, that's where I think X-Men 97 will make things interesting. Because in the finale, Cyclops and Jean ended up in the future. Xavier, Magneto, Beast, Rogue, and Nightcrawler ended up in the distant past. But we never learned where Wolverine, Storm, and Morph ended up. Now, shortly after the episode, former showrunner Beau DeMaio confirmed that they ended up in one of the two time periods. And given how crowded it is in the past, I predict the three of them will end up in the same distant future as Cyclops and Jean. And in that future, which appears as rapid as any apocalyptic timeline, a version of Apocalypse will find them and turn them into horsemen. They may even encounter Gambit in his new death form. But beyond just being new horsemen, Wolverine's feral state will prove difficult to control. Even under Apocalypse's guidance, he's never been big on others controlling him. And I can see Wolverine being among the first to break free from that control. That would in turn put him in a position to break Morph and Storm free if they end up being horsemen. And that could set the stage for some new dramatic subplots. It could pick back up on the One Man's Worth episodes that I mentioned earlier, because those episodes were also frequently referenced in the opening credits on multiple occasions, most notably because they were critical in both Nimrod and Bastion's origin. But another key element of those episodes involved Wolverine and Storm being married in the future. While neither of them remembers this due to the numerous complications associated with time travel, I think that plot could be revisited. And that would certainly add to the drama, given that Storm had already developed a relationship with Forge, and more flat out confessed his romantic feelings towards Wolverine. The end result would be yet another complicated love triangle. And while I personally despise love triangles, this would be a much needed change of pace. It does help that Storm and Wolverine have been romantically involved on numerous occasions in the comics. I also think Season 1 of X-Men 97 was critical in that it had Wolverine flat out admit to Jean Grey that they don't belong together. Even when he had a chance to get closer with her, he pushed her away. So while he's navigating this messy state of affairs with his feral side, he'll need someone else to help guide him through it. And that someone could be Storm. They might not end up married like they did in One Man's Worth, but it could lay a foundation, and Moore's feelings could only further add to those complications, as well as the drama. And X-Men 97 has shown that it is not afraid of that kind of drama. Once again, this isn't a theory as much as it is an extension of the events we saw in the finale. Beyond the multiple references to the Dark Phoenix saga in the opening sequence, we actually saw Jean manifest a trace of the Phoenix Force when she took down Sinister and saved Cable. It was nowhere near the power levels we saw in the Phoenix saga that played out in the original series, but it clearly establishes that the connection is still there. And that connection will likely evolve in Season 2. Her being in the distant future with Cyclops and young Nathan is another plot ripped straight from the comics. In the miniseries The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, the two of them traveled to the distant future together to raise their child. Now, they never got this chance in the past, and this would be a great way to continue the family moments that were so instrumental in the first season. But in that same series from the comics, Jean demonstrated that her connection to the Phoenix Force was still active. While that didn't become a factor until much later, I think it'll play a critical role in Season 2. Jean said outright while she was fighting Sinister that the Phoenix fixes what doesn't work, and I think that's exactly what the timeline will need given what's happening in the past with Apocalypse. Raising Cable to become the future soldier who would one day defeat Apocalypse is only part of that effort. Mitigating the impacts of time travel might end up being even more pressing, especially if Onslaught gets involved and does even more damage to the fabric of reality. Because beings this powerful are bound to do much more damage beyond certain points in time. So I predict that both Apocalypse and Onslaught will fight over the power to determine how the timeline ultimately plays out. But it'll be Jean Grey and the Phoenix Force who will make sure it remains intact. And the presence of Mother Ascani, who also happens to be a future child of Cyclops and Jean Grey, is another sign that the Phoenix will come into play. In addition to preserving the timeline, I also think the Phoenix will help Jean confront some of the lingering scars of what happened between her and Madeline prior. In Season 1, we never did find out from Sinister when she and Madeline were switched. And I don't think that's going to remain a mystery. I think at some point in Season 2, we'll find out when this switch occurred, and I think the Phoenix Force will play a critical role in that. Now, that's not to say that I think Madeline Pryor will come back to life. Her death on Genosha seemed fairly absolute. But I believe there may still be a part of her within Jean that she'll have to confront. It might end up being the only way for her to fully embrace the power of the Phoenix and do what must be done. In both the comics and in X-Men 97, Emma Frost was one of the few to survive the attack on Genosha. And in Grant Morrison's acclaimed run on the comics, this became a defining moment for her. It acted as a turning point that got Emma Frost more involved with the X-Men. And I predict we'll see something similar play out with her in Season 2. She was among the numerous mutants listed on Forge's board in that final scene with Bishop. And on Genosha, we saw that she did enjoy an important leadership role. And that is perfectly in character. Emma Frost is the White Queen after all. She's always drawn to positions of power and influence, be they with the X-Men, the Hellfire Club, or the leadership of a mutant nation. And I predict her survival in Episode 6 was shown for a reason. Given everyone who perished on Genosha, including what remained of the Hellfire Club, this creates a power vacuum, and Emma Frost would be in a perfect position to fill it. At the same time, the X-Men are missing. That creates yet another power vacuum. And while Forge might be more focused on building time machines with Bishop, Emma will remain focused on the present. I can definitely see her seeking out Jubilee and Roberto, who weren't on Asteroid M when it got sucked into the future. She might even use the Hellfire Club's resources to rebuild and reopen the Xavier Institute, inviting a new generation of mutants to join. Emma has done that in the comics as well. It might be how X-Men 97 brings others like Kitty Pryde, Dust, Helion, and Surge into the mix. I can definitely see Emma setting this team up as the new iteration of the X-Men. She might even try to become the new Charles Xavier, being one of the few telepaths powerful enough to utilize Cerebro. She might very well carry herself as an ally at first, claim she's only carrying on Xavier's legacy. But unlike the comics, X-Men 97 has not shown that this version of Emma Frost has undergone any kind of redemption arc. This is already hinted at in the opening sequence. Emma Frost is among the group of villains charging at the X-Men. And if she does end up becoming a villain, or at least an antagonistic force in Season 2, I think this could lead to simmering tensions in the present. Without Charles Xavier and the X-Men, a new host of threats could emerge, and even with Jubilee and Sunspot being in the present, it could end up further compounding those tensions. It's still hard to know what Emma's agenda will be, but she will have an agenda. How dangerous it might be, or how it could factor into other ongoing conflicts with Apocalypse, that still remains to be seen. But whatever the case, I'm confident in predicting that Emma Frost will play a critical role in future seasons of X-Men 97. Whatever ends up happening with this show, one thing is still certain. I am very excited for the future of X-Men 97. I already had lofty expectations for the show when it was announced, and in just the first season, it wildly exceeded those expectations. It established just the right tone and standard for the X-Men. And at a time when their arrival in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is imminent, this show was exactly what the franchise needed to get fans excited again. And Season 2 is sure to add to that excitement. We got plenty of hints and teases throughout the last few episodes. Apocalypse, Onslaught, the Phoenix Force, the Avengers, and Spider-Man. There's just so much for this show to work with. And if more seasons are approved, then it will continue building. This could mean we eventually get something like House of M. This could mean we eventually get a full-fledged Avengers versus X-Men clash. Or maybe we could get a version of the Messiah trilogy, complete with Cable raising a young Hope Summers. It's still easy to forget that the X-Men were frozen out of major media for years because of conflicting movie rights with Fox. As difficult as those times were, it also provided Marvel with plenty of time to tell numerous stories that evolved and expanded the X-Men in bold, ambitious ways. The first season of X-Men 97 laid a truly uncanny foundation, and I look forward to seeing what future seasons build upon it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.